Have you ever done everything right? Prayed, trusted, surrendered, and still felt like God was silent, distant, almost absent? Have you ever wondered why someone with a great desire to serve God, to be used, to be faithful, is the very person who gets crushed by the weight of the ordinary, by illness, humiliation, and doubt, before anything meaningful begins? Have you ever sat in the dark of your own smallness and asked, is this a test, or is this abandonment? God does not choose. They're finished. He chooses the breaking. And the one he chose to carry the message of divine mercy to the entire world was not a theologian, not a mystic born into privilege, not someone whose life unfolded cleanly toward holiness. She was a poorly educated girl from rural Poland who entered religious life and was misunderstood, doubted, assigned to kitchens and gardens, and tested until the last shred of self-reliance was gone, and only then did the mission begin. Her name is Saint Faustina Kowalska. Subscribe, because what God did with her brokenness, he wants to do with yours, and you need to hear this before you give up. Before God fills anything, he empties it, not because he is cruel, not because suffering is the price of love, but because a vessel that is already full of its own certainty, its own plans, its own idea of what holiness should look like, that vessel cannot receive what he is trying to give. The emptying is not punishment. The emptying is preparation, but the soul inside the vessel does not always know this. That is part of the test. Think of Helena Kowalska before she became Sister Faustina, a young woman from a family of 10 children, no money, no formal education beyond a few years of basic schooling, burning with a desire she could barely name. She wanted God, not moderately, not as one part of a life organized around other things. She wanted him the way a person lost in a desert wants water, completely, urgently, with everything she had. And what did he do with that desire? He made her wait. He sent her to work as a domestic servant. He allowed the family's poverty to prevent her entry into the convent, not once, not twice, but several times. He gave her a heart on fire and placed it inside circumstances of absolute ordinariness. Pause there, because that is the shape of the test in its first form. The desire is real, the call is real, and still, nothing opens, nothing moves. The door stays closed and the corridor gets darker. If you have ever stood in that corridor, you know what it costs. You know how easy it is in that moment to wonder whether the desire itself was a mistake, whether you misheard something, whether you are the wrong kind of person for the kind of life you are longing for. Saint Faustina would sit beside you in that corridor, and she would not give you easy answers. She would give you something better. She would give you her testimony, which is this: the waiting is not evidence that you are wrong. The waiting is the first room of the mission. She wrote in her diary, that extraordinary document of interior life that became one of the great mystical texts of the 20th century, she wrote, "I clearly feel that God is preparing me for something great." But she wrote that while scrubbing floors, while peeling potatoes, while being assigned tasks that had nothing to do with her sense of calling. She felt the greatness of what was coming, and she lived the smallness of what was present, and she did not resolve the tension by abandoning one for the other. She stayed in both. That is rare. That is actually rarer than ecstasies and visions and mystical gifts. The willingness to stay in the smallness while believing in the greatness. That is the particular heroism that God was cultivating in her. Think of your own life for a moment. Think of the thing you have been asked to carry quietly, the dream that has not opened, the door that stays shut, the capacity you feel inside you that no one around you seems to see or need. And ask yourself, what if this is not the obstacle to the mission? What if this is the mission's first classroom? The Church teaches, and Faustina's own life demonstrates, that God prepares souls with tremendous care and tremendous patience. He is not careless. He is not arbitrary. He does not scatter callings like seeds thrown into the wind, indifferent to where they land. He tends, he waits, he watches what the soul does with the waiting. And what the soul does with the waiting tells God, and tells the soul, more about its readiness than any single act of visible heroism could. Helena Kowalska eventually entered religious life. She was accepted by the congregation of the Sisters of Our Lady of Mercy in Warsaw, having arrived at the convent door with almost no possessions and very little formal education. And what waited for her inside religious life? Not the mystical experiences immediately, not the visions of Christ right away. What waited for her was more testing. Misunderstanding from her superiors, doubt from the confessor who first received her account of interior graces, reassignment after reassignment. She was moved between houses. She was given simple physical work. She was not treated as someone special, and this specific texture of the testing is important to understand, because God did not send Faustina difficult exterior suffering first. He sent her interior suffering first, the suffering of being unseen, the suffering of bearing something enormous inside and having no one to receive it, the suffering of being doubted by the very people who were supposed to help her discern. That is its own kind of wilderness. Maybe you know that wilderness too, not the dramatic suffering, the quieter kind. The kind where the people closest to you look at what you are carrying and do not recognize it, or do not take it seriously, or offer you a gentle correction that lands like a dismissal. That kind of suffering has its own particular loneliness. Faustina did not become bitter. She became transparent. And transparency, the willingness to let God be seen through the place where you were wounded, that is not something that can be manufactured. It is something that suffering, received in faith, produces, slowly, over years. This is Block 1's invitation. Stop treating the testing as an interruption. Let it be what it is, the shape of the vessel being formed to carry something it could not have carried before. There is a particular cruelty to the test that arrives not as obvious opposition, but as uncertainty. When the enemy attacks clearly, when someone tells you directly that your faith is foolish or your calling is fantasy, the soul can resist with clarity. But when the doubt arrives from inside, when you cannot tell whether the voice urging you forward is from God or from your own need, when you cannot separate genuine spiritual experience from spiritual delusion, that is when the testing becomes surgical. That is when it goes all the way down to the root. Saint Faustina knew this test intimately, and she wrote about it without flinching. There were periods in her life when she was told by her spiritual director to dismiss entirely what she had been receiving in prayer. Father Sapocco, who eventually became her great defender and collaborator, was not immediately convinced. He tested her. He sent her to a psychiatrist. He withheld affirmation. He was careful in a way that to Faustina must have felt, at least at times, like abandonment. Consider what she was being asked to carry. She was receiving what she understood to be direct communications from Christ, visions of the divine mercy image, instructions about the chaplet, revelations about God's desire to flood the world with mercy before the day of justice. These were not small interior consolations. They were world historical in their scope, and she was a simple woman with no theological training, no institutional power, no platform. She was being asked to hold something enormous while being given almost no external support. That is the test in its second form. Carry the vision without the confirmation. You may not be carrying mystical visions, but you are probably carrying something that has not yet been confirmed by the world around you. A sense of purpose, a conviction about a particular path, a knowledge, deep and sure, but completely unverifiable to anyone outside you, that you are being led somewhere. And the people around you are not hostile exactly, but they are not confirming either. They are waiting to see. They are cautious. And their caution, however reasonable, lands on your interior life like a cold wind. What did Faustina do? She did not stop. She did not leave. She did not become defensive or resentful. She did something that is almost more difficult than any of those options. She submitted. She placed her experiences before her spiritual director, and when he counseled caution, she counseled herself into caution. She let his discernment act upon her discernment. She trusted the structure of the church to be a vehicle of truth, even when that structure was, in the short term, making her wait. This is not weakness, this is not passivity. This is an extraordinarily refined form of trust, the willingness to place your interior life into the hands of another, and believe that God can work through that imperfect mediation. Most of us are not willing to do that. We hold our sense of calling so tightly, we protect our interior conviction so fiercely, that we cannot let anyone close enough to test it, and so it never gets purified. It stays in us, warm and private and unverified, and it either calcifies into rigidity or dissolves into sentimentality. Faustina's willingness to be tested, to submit even the content of her visions to scrutiny, is part of what makes the mission that emerged from them credible. The testing did not diminish the revelation. The testing authenticated it. There is a line in her diary that cuts to the center of this. She writes about a period of intense interior darkness, of feeling God's absence so acutely that she could barely pray. And she says, "I want to be completely transformed into your mercy and to be your living reflection, O Lord." Not, "I want to feel you near." Not, "I want the visions to return." I want to be transformed into mercy. I want to reflect what you are, not what I am experiencing. That shift, from I want to feel to I want to become, is the shift that the testing produces in a soul that cooperates with it, rather than collapses under it. And it is a shift available to you too, not at the end of some great spiritual ordeal, right now, in whatever ordinary, unclear, unconfirmed moment you are standing in. Here is the invitation of this block. The next time doubt arrives, the kind that questions not just your choices, but the entire interior architecture of your faith, try receiving it the way Faustina received it, not as evidence of failure, not as proof that you are lost, but as the pressure that tests whether what you are carrying is real, because if it is real, it will hold, and if it holds under the testing, you will know something you could not have known any other way. You will know that what you have been given is not fragile. You will know it can bear weight, and the mission that emerges from a soul that knows its own strength, that has been tested and found faithful, carries a different authority than anything that has never been questioned. People recognize it, not always consciously, but they recognize it. There is something in a voice that has been through the doubt and emerged still believing. There is something in a life that has been tested and not broken. It speaks before a single word is said. By the time St. Faustina was given the full understanding of her mission, she was ill. This is not a detail. This is the center of everything. She contracted tuberculosis. Her health deteriorated across the years of her most intense mystical activity. She suffered physically in ways that were not abstract or spiritualized. She was in pain. She was weakened. She was limited in ways that a young woman who wanted to work, to serve, to accomplish things for God, might have found unbearable. And it was precisely in this physical diminishment that the deepest theology of her life took shape. Because what God was teaching her, what he was transmitting through the very texture of her suffering, was the message she was being asked to carry. You cannot preach divine mercy convincingly if you have never needed it in the place where pride refuses to go. You cannot speak of surrender as something beautiful if you have never surrendered something that cost you. You cannot carry a message about God's tenderness toward the broken if you have never been broken in the specific place where your strength used to live. St. Faustina was not incidentally sick while doing something else important. Her illness was itself the formation. The suffering was the school in which the message was received at the deepest level, not intellectually, not theologically, but in the body, in the breath, in the limitation. This is the part of the testing that is hardest to receive, and the part that the culture around us makes nearly impossible to understand. We have been trained to believe that the interruption of our capacity is always a problem to be solved. Illness is something to be overcome. Weakness is something to be compensated for. The body's failure is always a setback, never a gift. And here is Faustina, dying at 33, and Christ, in her diary, in her account of these interior conversations, Christ is not consoling her by telling her she will be healed. He is telling her she is right now in her diminishment, participating in something. He is telling her that the soul who suffers in union with his passion is not wasting its life. It is spending it on something eternal. There is a moment in the diary where Faustina reflects on a particularly difficult period of physical and spiritual suffering, and she writes, "I know that you are love itself, and therefore your heart is full of mercy." Not, "I know you will take this away." Not, I know there is a reason. I know that you are love. And because you are love, mercy is your natural climate, and I am living inside that climate, even when I cannot feel the warmth of it. That is not a sentence you write from a comfortable distance. That is a sentence you write when you have been forced all the way down to where the only thing left is what you actually believe, and what Faustina actually believed. What the testing had ground her down to, the way a river grinds stone to reveal what cannot be worn away, was this: God is love. Mercy is real. And a soul that trusts in that mercy, no matter what it is enduring, is never alone in the enduring. Think of something you are enduring right now. Not the dramatic things, those are easy to theologize. The small grinding ones, the chronic frustration, the relationship that will not heal, the talent that has no outlet, the prayer that has been prayed 1,000 times with no visible answer. Bring that to this moment. And hear Faustina, not the canonized saint with the halo and the image of divine mercy beside her, but the woman in the sickbed, the woman in the kitchen, the woman who was doubted and tested and reduced. Hear her say to you, your suffering is not evidence that God has forgotten you. It may be the very place where He is most actively forming you. The soul that has been tested in this third way, the way of physical or circumstantial limitation that cannot be escaped, only received, that soul emerges with a particular quality of compassion, because it has been in the place where human solutions run out. It has stood at the edge of what willpower can accomplish, and it has found that there is something, someone, on the other side of that edge. That is the knowledge that a mission built on human strength alone cannot carry. That is the knowledge that only comes from the testing. And that is the knowledge that God, in His strange and surgical patience, was cultivating in Faustina across every year of her hidden, painful, extraordinary life. He is not done cultivating it in you either. The test you are in, whatever form it takes, however long it has lasted, however close it has come to breaking what you thought was unbreakable, the test is not outside the mission. The test is producing the person capable of carrying it, the divine mercy image. You have seen it, the risen Christ, white and red rays of light streaming from His heart, and at the bottom the words, Jesus, I trust in you. Faustina saw this image in a vision in 1931. She was instructed to have it painted and to spread the devotion attached to it, the chaplet, the novena, the feast of divine mercy. And she did, against resistance, against her own fragility, against a church institution that moved slowly and cautiously, as institutions must. She died in 1938. She was 33 years old. She did not see the full fruit of what she had been given and what she had endured. She did not see the feast of divine mercy established. She did not see the crowds at Kraków-Łagiewnicki. She did not see John Paul II, who had prayed at her grave before his own pontificate began, declare her a saint and canonize the devotion she had carried at such cost. She planted. She did not harvest. And that, too, is part of what the testing produces. A soul willing to act faithfully without requiring the confirmation of visible results. A soul that can say, I will be faithful to what I have been given, and I will leave the fruitfulness to God. To a soul that understands that obedience to the mission and ownership of the outcome are two completely different things, and that it has been asked to hold the first and release the second entirely. This is the shape of every soul that has been prepared through testing. Think of the apostles after the resurrection, not the triumphant post-Pentecost apostles, but the earlier ones, the frightened ones hiding behind a locked door, the ones who had spent 3 years watching and listening and still did not fully understand, who fled when the crisis came. The testing was not wasted on them. Even the failure was not wasted. Peter's denials were not outside God's plan for Peter. They were inside it. They were the specific kind of brokenness that produced the specific kind of humility that made Peter's leadership of the early church possible. A Peter who had never failed could not have said to the early Christians, I fell, and He restored me. Go and do likewise. Faustina's testing produced the same quality. Her smallness, her illness, her obscurity, her doubt, all of it produced a testimony that carried a particular kind of weight. Because when she spoke about mercy, She was not speaking theoretically. She was not speaking from strength. She was speaking from the place where mercy is not a theological concept, but a lived necessity, the only explanation for why a soul like hers could carry what she carried and keep going and not be destroyed. And here is what God is doing in you, in whatever testing you are inside right now. He is not waiting for you to become strong enough to carry the mission. He is using the place where your strength fails to build something in you that your strength alone could never build. He is not waiting for the doubt to end before he trusts you with something important. He is using the doubt to produce the quality of trust that can only be formed in the absence of certainty. He is not waiting for the suffering to be over before the mission begins. The suffering received in faith may be the mission itself, the specific form of participation in his passion that he has assigned to your particular life at this particular time. You do not have to understand it. You do not have to feel it as meaningful. You have to stay. That is the entire instruction distilled to its smallest form. Stay. Stay present to what is being asked of you. Stay faithful to the chaplet, to the prayer, to the daily surrender. Stay in the testing without running from it, without resolving it artificially, without forcing it into a shape that feels more acceptable. Stay. Faustina stayed in the kitchen. She stayed in the sickbed. She stayed under the doubt of her confessors. She stayed in the smallness of her circumstances. And the staying, that single, invisible, undramatic act performed over and over across years of ordinary days, was what God used to form a soul capable of carrying the message of his mercy to the entire world. She would look at your life and she would not be impressed by your achievements or discouraged by your failures. She would look at one thing. Are you still there? Are you still showing up to the prayer even when the prayer feels empty? Are you still choosing trust even when trust costs something? Are you still saying, even in the dark, even in the doubt, even in the limitation, Jesus, I trust in you? Because if you are, if that is the single sentence your life keeps coming back to, regardless of everything that is pressing against it, then you are already in the mission, not preparing for it, not waiting for it to begin, in it, right now, in this moment. The testing was never the prelude to something else. The testing was always itself the place where God was working, and the soul that learns to receive it as such, not with forced gladness, not with spiritual performance, but with honest, costly, daily surrender. That soul will one day look back and understand what Faustina understood, that every moment of it was mercy, even the hardest ones, especially the hardest ones. Trust in his mercy, stay in the testing, and let what he is forming in you become what he needs you to carry,